Start a recording here. So hello, Dr. Mayer, how are you?
Hi, Julie. Nice to be back, even though it's remote, but
nice to have you here at Virtual Warwick's. We were just talking in the green room. It was what, like 4 years ago was the last time we had you at the store, correct?
Yeah. And I was just down in La Jolla a few weeks ago and walked by the store and said, wow, going to be speaking there virtually soon.
I know. Yeah, it would have been wonderful to have you at the store, but hopefully we'll get you back into the store one of these days soon. But it's great to have you here virtually. So I'm going to just tell people a little bit about what's going to happen today. And for anybody that's joining us outside of the La Jolla, San Diego area that might not know who Warwick's is, that's where we're located. So if you are in the San Diego, La Jolla area, we would love you to come by the store. Store's open, browsing. You can find Dr. Mayer's book there and all kinds of other wonderful things. So today, Dr. Mayer's going to talk to you for about 30 minutes. And so I will be putting his book into the comment section. You can easily click on that and we can ship you that book. Or if you are in the San Diego area and you want to come by the store, just choose pick up at store and we will have that book waiting for you. If you have any questions for Dr. Mayer, he's going to talk to you for about 35 minutes about his book and about the topic here today. But if you have any questions, don't be shy, put those into the comment section. I am recording this, so it's going to end up on YouTube. So we won't be live on YouTube for questions, but it'll be great for people to watch if they have to step away for any reason or if they want to share it that way. But like I said, go ahead and put those questions into the comment section and I'll bring those into Dr. Mayer at about that 35 minute point. So let me do my formal introduction of you, Dr. Mayer, and then I'll turn the screen over to you. So Dr. Emeran Mayer has studied brain-body interactions for the last 40 years. He is the executive director of the G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience and the co-director of the Digestive Disease Research Center at the University of California at Los Angeles. His research has been supported by the National Institutes of Health for the past 25 years, and he is considered a pioneer and world leader in the area of brain-gut microbiome interactions. You can see his book behind him there, The Gut Immune Connection, How Understanding the Connection Between Food and Immunity Can Help Us Regain Our Health. With that, Dr. Mayer, the screen is yours, and I will see you in about a half hour.
Sounds good, Julie. Thank you for the introduction. So let me do the screen share. Oops. Okay, here we go. So I'll take this opportunity to talk about several areas in my book that I think are of particular interest to the audience, and I'll kind of rush through this. This book is pretty comprehensive in terms of updating people on the science in a life-friendly way, but I'll try to avoid the science as much as I can. Oops. So about 4 years ago, I came down to Warwick's and gave a talk about my first book, The Mind-Gut Connection. And you can see some of the topics that I talked about there. How microbes can talk to each other and to the brain, gut reactions, gut feelings, the role of the brain-gut interactions and emotions, role of early memories. And then also, I got into the book at the end into dietary recommendations, particularly the contrast between the standard American diet or SAT and the Mediterranean diet, and mentioned something about optimal health. So I'll focus on the second part of these topics in my talk today. And I want to start with something that probably a lot of people have forgotten in the pandemic. So this is America's silent public health crisis, something that has been going on over the last 75 years, really since the end of World War II. I think a lot of Americans have not paid as much attention to it because with the help of the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare system, the people have been kept alive despite getting sicker and sicker. And you'll see some of this explained, the statement explained as I go on in this talk. The problem is that this silent public health crisis in some ways also has increased the risk for the pandemic and will increase the risk for future pandemics as well. So if you look at this, this curve that goes from a state of optimal health, as defined by the World Health Organization, these criteria are only met by about 5% of the population, of the US population. About, if you go on the other extreme, about 45% are suffering from chronic diseases. And we'll come back to these diseases, these chronic non-communicable diseases that have increased progressively in the last 75 years. And then we have about 50% of people in a suboptimal health state and in a pre-disease state. So before this part of the population enters the healthcare or the disease care system, better explained, there are indications that their bodies and minds are not healthy. And it's, in some ways, it's tragic that that is the case. Such a big proportion is affected by this. On the other hand, this is a huge opportunity for intervention with healthy diets and healthy lifestyle to move a large portion of this population over into the optimal health category. So one statistics that's often shown is that we had, we had a chronic disease epidemic of infectious diseases in the past. So mumps, measles, TB, rheumatic fever, hepatitis, and that all these diseases have decreased in their prevalence dramatically. But at the same time, and again, this 1950s or end of World War II, there's been a progressive increase of other types of diseases, which all can be related in some ways to the immune system, to dysfunction of the immune system, such as autoimmune diseases like Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, asthma, and other autoimmune diseases and allergies. So we have exchanged the curse of the infectious diseases with this non-infectious disease epidemic. And so I'll show some evidence that we're beginning to understand why that happened. Factors that have been identified are environmental factors during the birth mode, nutrition and lifestyle, and exposure to xenobiotics, which is environmental chemicals, but also various medications. So this is a way that I've presented and discussed the situation in the gut-immune connection, that there are these seemingly unrelated diseases ranging from depression, Alzheimer's disease, to cardiovascular disease, obesity, autism spectrum, even colon cancer. And somehow they're all connected. They're connected in several ways. They're connected because if you have one of these diseases, your risk to have another one is increased. Similarly, all these diseases have increased in industrialized societies and are now increasing with some delay in developing societies. They are occurring in younger and younger age groups. A good example is colon cancer, which we used to screen patients for colon cancer at age 50. That has recently been lowered to age 40 because of the younger onset. And this is also true about metabolic syndrome and obesity and cardiovascular disease. The red lines between these schematics of the diseases show the immune signals that play a role, alterations in immune signaling between gut health, where a lot of this starts out from, and we'll talk more about this, and these various diseases. So if you look at a deeper connection, some of these headlines, these titles are chapters from the book. So the gut is not Vegas. What happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. And I should disclose that, I'm a gastroenterologist by training, and I've seen thousands of patients with gastrointestinal problems. It's not because of that I'm biased to try to convince you that the gut plays a major role in this, but it's really for for scientific reasons that will become clear. So the gut microbiome, something that everybody has heard about. In the meantime, it's a big topic in the lay media. The gut microbiome, 140 trillion invisible microorganisms living in the darkness of the gut, oxygen-free. Nobody will ever get to see them unless you have a specialized microscope and you're a scientist. But we know now that these microbes, either through contact with immune cells or through some neuroactive or some metabolic compounds that they produce, can interact with the immune system. And in this case, for example, can play a role in inappropriate inflammation of the gut, like happens in inflammatory bowel disease. And I'll go with this very, very cursory way, because it would take a whole hour to really explain this in details. Similarly, molecules produced by the microbes play a role in activating or inhibiting immune cells. And this lack of inhibition has resulted in a overreaction of the immune system to food items. So this increase in food allergies that has happened the last 50, 75 years is related to a good part to substances that these microbes produce. We also know that microbes, mainly through activation of the immune system, can play a major role in this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, one of the most common forms of chronic liver disease today. Play a major role in cardiovascular disease. So there's the compound TMAO that is produced by the microbes and then converted by the liver. And that compound has been shown to have, in some studies, an equally negative effect on the risk for cardiovascular disease as bad cholesterol. And then there's the brain, something that I've been particularly interested in. So signaling molecules from the microbes, either in a good way, so these short-chain fatty acids always have a positive or anti-inflammatory effect on immune cells in different organs, or through molecules that actually can stimulate microglia cells, or type of immune cells in the brain, can compromise the blood-brain barrier integrity and lead to, probably plays a role in diseases, in chronic degenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. So we have learned, there's certainly a lot of this from animal models and from comparative epidemiological human studies, that microbial products or their cell wall components play a major role through the immune system in the disease of many, possibly most of our organs. So this concept of interconnectedness of the microbes with the immune system, with the gut, and then with all organs, sort of is a small section of something that that I found fascinating in my own studies, and also there's a growing awareness of this concept, this interconnectedness of our own bodies, our brains, our gut, the immune system with the environment. And we'll come back to this during this presentation. And then these these feedback loops that hold this complex network together can be perturbed by factors such as dietary stress and unhealthy diet, or can be perturbed by chronic psychological stress, persistent psychological stress. Both are things that that evolution has not prepared us for well. Really well, our bodies and brains have perfect systems to respond to acute stress, trigger behavioral adaptive responses, and they have perfect responses responding to various diets. They're not adapted in a good way to these chronic types of stressors that our brain-gut microbiome system is exposed to in the modern world. So the microbes, as I mentioned earlier, a complex system that we only recently in the last 10, 20 years paid attention to. What's most intriguing is not just the number of these microbes, but it's the number of their genes, so the information that they have stored in their own genes. You can see several orders of magnitude larger than our human genes, graphically depicted here. So the red line is our human genes, the white body are the microbial genes. And in all of our concepts of pathophysiology or disease, both diagnosis and treatment, we neglect 99% of the system that's really part of us, because these microbes live in such an intricate connection with us, not just in the gut, but as I've shown you in the previous slide, communicating with all these other organs through their signaling molecules. And research has shown that there's multiple factors that can influence the human gut microbiome. Some of the most important ones shown here. Diet, I'll focus on that during my talk, and also a big focus in the book on that. In early life, the programming of the microbiome, very important. Breastfeeding, the delivery, the mode of delivery. Drugs play a crucial role both early on in life, the over application of antibiotics, but also other drugs that compromise the development of a healthy microbiome. We also know that aging plays a role, not necessarily healthy aging. In healthy aging, we actually have much less compromise of the gut microbiota as we have in aging in people that develop all these various chronic diseases. And then exercise. Moderate regular exercise has been shown to have a beneficial effect on the diversity and richness, whereas extreme exercise like ultramarathons, if done on a regular basis, will have a function just like chronic severe stress does. So a few comments on how diet regulates the brain-gut microbiome network. So this is a depiction of the Mediterranean diet pyramid. Obviously, not everybody feeds their microbes this kind of diet. The microbes love it because it is full of plant-based food, 75%, which is the kind of food that microbes break down into smaller molecules, into signaling molecules, and also use as their own food. So this food that we ingested is metabolized by microbes, and the breakdown products or metabolites, a very large number, which are interacting with each other and interacting with metabolites that the human body also produces. They interact and they influence, as I've shown you earlier, not just the immune system, but through the immune system, every other system and organ in our body. Now, if we are on a diet that's deficient in these plant-based components, there will be this will be a bad time for our microbes because it is starving them of their most needed food items. And these metabolites and the effects on the immune system will be quite different than in somebody who is living on this type of a diet. And let me just illustrate this. It's a little bit complicated, but I think it makes a good point here. We mentioned this 20 million genes that our microbes have that makes them very adaptable to any changes, so rapid adaptation of their relative abundances, their diversity and their richness to changing influences. So changing influences that we have experienced as humans in the last 75 years is in lifestyle, again, particularly diet and persistent chronic stress, changes in how we come into this world, birth in hospitals, mode of delivery, altered a reduction of exposure to environmental microbes, and then medical practices, particularly antibiotics and hygiene. So these factors, as well as others, have caused a state of dysbiosis, and that simply refers to the fact that our gut microbes have changed. They don't look the same way as they look in indigenous people, for example, who live in the Amazon or in East Africa. But then what happens, these microbes that have rapidly adapted to these new environmental circumstances, they create a mismatch between our gut. Our gut is regulated by, has a very slow adaptation. It takes about 10 to 15,000 years for our genes to change in response to environmental changes. And so we have a mismatch of a very rapidly adapting system in terms of the microbes and a very slowly adapting system of our human bodies and our human gut, which leads to the warning lights go off in the immune system. That's mainly 75% of our immune cells are located in the gut, just underneath the surface, the epithelial surface. These immune cells are activated, and some of this spills over into the systemic circulation. Some of this immune activation stays in the gut, but a lot of it spills over in the systemic circulation and affects all these organs. So cytokines, components, cell wall components, lipopolysaccharides, it's coming from these microbes that actually at some point are able to penetrate this very tight layer of cells and mucus and get full access to the immune system. So often people say they're looking for ways to boost their immune system or strengthen their immune system. Well, in reality, our biggest problem is an overreactive immune system because the alarm bells have gone off in our body, in our gut, dealing with a different microbiome that is not matched to the same developmental stage as our guts are. And this is what happens. So a healthy gut, an abundant, rich, diverse microbiome separated from the immune system, the 70% of immune cells that live in the gut, by two layers, a mucus layer, very tight mucus layer, and a very tight epithelial layer. And there are certain immune cells, these dendritic cells, that actually can reach into the mucus layer, but if there's no microbes in it, it will not lead to an activation. So what happens on the standard American diet or with chronic stress, there's a decrease in the diversity of the microbes, a thinning of the mucus layer, an increase in the permeability between these epithelial cells. And at some point, the gut barrier is broken. There's a translocation of immune cells that get into the gut immune system and triggers this immune activation. And once these immune cells and immune mediators get into the systemic circulation, we have a situation called metabolic endotoxemia. Endotoxemia normally is in response to an infection, serious life-threatening infection. This is a much lower scale, and it's simply related to dietary and environmental influences. You can say that probably at least 30% of people in the US, maybe this number is lower in the coastal regions, suffer from this condition. And if there is an increased genetic risk for any one of these diseases, this situation plays a major role in increasing the chances that somebody will develop any one of these diseases, or sometimes even more than one of them. So for example, metabolic syndrome, one of the most common manifestations, increases the risk for both cognitive decline and for Parkinson's disease and for depression. And so these reciprocal amplifications of risk in response to this metabolic endotoxemia is a well-known phenomenon. So the key to gut health is in the soil. This is something that I personally have not known 5 or 10 years ago, and I've gotten extremely excited about this concept that has been promoted by several scientists working in this area. So the healthy soil is teeming with microbes, the high diversity. So if you look at the numbers, 10 trillion microbial cells in 1 gram of soil, 10,000 different microbial species. And a particularly important aspect is that these microbes interact with the root system, or called the rhizome. They communicate with the root system and therefore are able to generate signals that then reach the plant, defending the plant against various diseases, infections, UV light, droughts, insects, and many others. So it's the plant's own pharmacy is completely dependent on the healthy soil and the microbes that interact with the plant. And I'm going to show this to you, how similar this this biological design is really with our own brain-gut microbiome system. So here is again the plant with the rhizosphere, the microbes living close to it. Compost is an important factor to increase the diversity and richness of the soil microbes. When we eat plant-based food that has been grown in a regenerative organic matter with a very rich soil microbiome, we consume these molecules that the plants produce for their own protection, this medicine for the plants, polyphenols. We consume them. We can't absorb them in our small intestine because they're too big. So they'll go down into our large intestine, or the end of the small intestine, are then broken down by our own microbes, which almost functions like the soil, microbes, and liberate metabolites, molecules that then can be absorbed and reach various organs in our body, including the brain. So this system explains a lot why it's so important to eat a largely plant-based diet, and not just any plant, but plants that are grown in a regenerative organic fashion in soil that is rich and abundant in microbes and diverse microbes. So what has happened? So I mentioned several times this time limit, episode of 75 years. So what has happened during that time? Many people have probably heard now, in the meantime, this word anthropocene is made on the cover of many prominent magazines. So essentially it refers to the human epoch. Humans have become the main factor in those 75 years that influence the planet. It's no longer the planet creating its own destiny. It's humans that are the major influence. And this has, you would think in some ways, is an amazing thing that gives us tremendous opportunity to do good things. But the way we have been dealing with this responsibility and with this power has not been to the best of our health. So one example, just fresh off the press from the report yesterday from the UN Climate Committee report, this Code Red for Humanity, So if you look at, and this illustrates this anthropocene concept, simulated natural factors only, the effect on the average temperature on the planet would be minimal or non-existent. But human factors, together with natural factors, are now the main driving force. So humans have become the main driving force of major things like climate, soil health, in our own health, obviously. There has been sort of a connection between this concept of the Anthropocene, the environmental health, and planetary health and human health. So this Eat Lancet Commission report that came out in 2019 illustrated, and I won't have time to get into the details, how we have surpassed as humans the boundaries that are that exist for us in terms of food production, food consumption, boundaries that assure that we humans stay healthy and the planet stays healthy. And you can see anything that goes over the 100%, which is a boundary that would be required for both human and planetary health, we're way above with animal products, way above with starchy vegetables, with dairy products, with poultry, and and with dairy products. So that's a great egg consumption as well. So we have crossed multiple boundaries that have been calculated, would be required to stay within these boundaries if we want to reverse some of the trends that have happened, both in terms of production of this food. So production of animal products has a major impact on the climate, both in terms of methane production, again, emphasized by the Climate Committee report, but also in terms of deforestation to make room for the soybeans and the corn to feed these animals. So how did we get here? I'll go through this quickly. Time-wise, I think I have a few minutes left. One thing that I showed you before in terms of the health of our gut microbiome, diversity is a key concept. The gut microbiome is an ecosystem, just like the ecosystems, the natural ecosystems around us. And it is interesting to see that this Anthropocene has gone along with an assault on ecosystem health on all levels, from the microbial, invisible, to large animals. So you can see these changes shown here from, for example, in terms of large animals, from wild animals and in natural habitats to farm animals, again from another group of wild animals to farm animals and pigs. You can see what the result of these transitions or this extinction of biological diversity, what this has caused for planetary and climate health, with increased production of all these gases that we know in the meantime play a major role in greenhouse gases and global warming. And this has also happened in the ocean. And it is obviously related to what I showed you earlier. We have crossed the boundaries of the food that we consume. This is driving the extinction of and the replacement of natural ecosystems with, for example, domestic animals, to assure the kind of growing need for animal products, for example. Another thing that has happened, loss of diversity in plant-based foods. So not only loss of diversity in ecosystems, but also loss of diversity in plant-based foods, which also has major impacts on our health, but also on the way that these foods are grown. To just pick a couple of examples, from 540 varieties of cabbage, it's gone down to 28 varieties. From 460 varieties of radish, that's gone down to 27. tomatoes from 408 to 79. So this has happened in all our plant-based foods, but particularly in the US. This has happened to a lesser degree in places like Italy, where you still have a large variety, for example, of grains. This may be one of the reasons why the limited number of grains that we have in this country have negative effects on health, including this whole concept, this epidemic of celiac sensitivity. If you look at these numbers, 75% of plant genetic diversity has been lost. So those percentage numbers are kind of equaling each other from the previous slide. How many animal species have disappeared? Not quite as dramatic with the microbial species, but there's a trend in all of these biological domains. 30% of livestock breeds are at risk of extinction because they're vulnerable to various diseases, and having just a few of these varieties left, the risk is much higher than they will disappear completely. Of 250,000 edible plant species, only 150 to 200 are used by humans. If you think about, concepts in traditional Chinese medicine or Hippocratic medicine, or, it's been said that food is medicine. So we essentially have eliminated the potential medicines for many of our chronic diseases just based on those numbers. So what can we do? So one of the biggest factors, most likely, is to focus on healthy diets from sustainable food systems. So this was also the conclusion of this Eat Lancet report, which stated that transformation to these diets will require substantial dietary shifts. Global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes will have to double, and consumption of foods such as red meat, sugar will have to be reduced by more than 50%. A diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal-sourced foods confers both improved health and environmental benefits. So there was a lot of criticism of this report. Obviously, a lot of meat lovers don't like it, don't believe it. There's also been discussed the impact that these recommendations may have on people's living in other countries and societies that are dependent on the growth of these, on the production of some of these foods. But there's no question from multiple directions now that this is one of the major things that we have to undertake in order to slow climate change and improve our own health. So the simple solution: healthy food makes healthy microbes and make healthy humans, and make a big case that a healthy diet, the healthiest diet is a diet that is the healthiest diet for our microbes. So if you find out what microbes love, fiber and polyphenols, and pick your food based on those criteria, you will be eating automatically the healthiest diet for yourself. This is the other extreme, which we have with the standard American diet. Just a few more examples. Food is clearly medicine, which is really rediscovering an ancient truth. Many of these food items shown here are now called superfoods, but it's just really foods that we have forgotten to consume and to appreciate. So take-home points: communication between the gut microbiome and the gut-based immune system is an ancient evolutionary conserved system that modulates the function of every organ, including brain structure and function. This communication connects the mind, the gut, connectome, food, and environment in a way that can best be understood in a systems biological way, with a paradigm of interconnectedness. Key components of a diverse plant-based diet act through the gut microbiome. And I mentioned this before, it's the polyphenols and it's the fiber molecules that plants have to reduce systemic immune activation and prevalence of chronic infectious diseases. And again, we don't have to boost our immune system. For most people, we have to reduce the activation or attenuate the activation or reintroduce natural mechanisms that allow our bodies, our immune system to do that. And that leads me to the final slide. So the One Health concept, people have used that concept before. I think it's the best way to describe the intricate connection between diet, individual and planetary health, with the microbes playing a key role in these interactions, in these interconnections. Okay, so if you want to learn more about these brain-gut microbiome immune interactions, go to my website, emeran.com. There you can sign up for our bi-weekly Mind-Gut Connection newsletter. And obviously, there's a lot of information on the website that you'll find useful, previous editions of the newsletter as well. And if you want to make that step to go to Warwick's and pick up a copy of an actual copy of the book, either the Mind-Gut Connection or the Gut Immune Connection, hopefully this presentation will incentivize you to do that. Thank you very much.
I'm back. Hello. That was so fascinating. I have a couple quick questions, and I invite anybody that's watching us on Facebook, if you have any questions for Dr. Mir, to go ahead and put those in there as well. There was a lot of things I was writing down, little notes, but let's talk about the book for a second. What can people expect to get from the book? Are there practical steps that people can take? Is that what the book is designed to do?
Yeah, there's many practical steps that are being addressed, from the regular moderate exercise to sleep hygiene, to time-restricted eating. But also there's a whole chapter with more than 40 recipes that are all based on the concepts that are laid out in the book. So high in fiber, high in polyphenols, and very low in the components of the typical, standard American diet. So that's a new thing. And we also provide on the website and the newsletter, every 2 weeks, we provide new recipes, which do come from the Mediterranean diet.
Okay. Because that's the thing, when you were talking about getting rid of meat and sugar, and there's such an industrialized complex that goes with those things, and the convenience factor of the way that food's manufactured. That makes it really, some people just find it really hard to make that shift from the convenience to, making things from scratch and doing things that are more natural.
Yeah, that is true. And there are some, I have to admit, there's some complex recipes, so it's a wide range. There's some very simple recipes, like bowls that you could eat either, for breakfast or for lunch, that take 5 minutes to put together. It will require some change in your shopping habits if you spend more time in the vegetable and fruit section, and less time in the meat section and dairy section. But most of these recipes are fairly easy. It's not rocket science,
Right.
It's not that time consuming either. Once
there's a mind shift that has to happen, I think.
There's a mind shift, and then your body gets used to it. It was a very interesting phenomenon just with the sugar consumption. We have noticed that within a year, and we've done this really intensively during the pandemic, within a year, your sensitivity for sugar changes dramatically, that you actually became, that the normally sweetened stuff is too sweet for you.
Interesting.
So, no matter what that is, if it's pastry or yogurts or whatever, you just don't like that anymore.
Interesting.
So your body adapts to this, and give it 6 months to switch your diet, and you'll find that you don't want to go back to the old one.
And with the switch, so when you're talking about like the mucus layer and those things that break down, does that actually redo itself? I mean, is there a healing process that happens with that when you go into this switch of a diet?
Yeah, so this is not something, so none of these changes at the gut level are irreversible.
Okay.
Some of the downstream changes, obviously, on the brain, if you have been on an unhealthy diet for 60 years, not all the changes in your brain, the neurodegeneration will revert back to normal. I think we're far away from that we can say, if you have fully developed Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, that a diet can really reverse that. But at the gut level, and this is important, this all needs to start early in life. This should start with mothers cooking that way and children growing up this way, ideally getting this message in the school. Um, because so many of these diseases, it takes decades before they develop,
Right. And then once they do, it's almost a point of no return, like you said.
Well, probably as what we know today, yes, right, that's true.
Now, and this is just a personal question that I'm going to ask. Where does cortisol fit into this, and stress? Does that play into this at all?
Yeah, stress plays a role in two ways. So one is, there's two components, two arms of the stress response. One is the sympathetic nervous system that innervates the gut, and the other one is the cortisol that goes through your adrenal glands. There's many studies that have shown how the sympathetic nervous system activation can make your gut leakier, same as a bad diet does, but can also affect the microbial gene expression and turn good microbes into bad ones, decrease the diversity, and the glucocorticoids and cortisol, there's fewer studies on that, how they work through the gut microbiome and these gut factors that there's clearly a huge literature of what it does on the immune system, what it does on the brain, this what we call chronic allostatic load, a chronic activation of the stress system, both in terms of what it does to the gut and what it does to the cortisol, downstream effects of cortisol.
Yeah, so very interesting, because I know that's so. Jill, you were asking, and I don't know if that just answered your question. There was a question that came in from Jill. Is that breakdown of the mucus layer what is referred to as leaky gut? And in your previous conversation, yes, that is in one of your slides. The breakdown of the mucus layer is what causes leaky gut, correct?
Yeah, it's the first step. So people have always this lay concept that there's holes in your gut and these microbes go through, and if that were the case, you would have a fulminant inflammation of your gut, like a colitis,
Right.
But the thinning of the mucus layer, the only thing that this does is it gets the microbes in the gut closer to these sensors that I showed, these dendritic cells. So it doesn't have to even be a hole in the gut wall, just that contact makes these cells produce more cytokines. And then if it gets more serious, then obviously, then permeability, and then the microbes go through, and there's something on the cell wall of microbes that stimulate certain receptors on immune cells that trigger, but all of this is much more low grade than what we get with a severe infection, where you might end up in the intensive care unit and get antibiotics. For these conditions, antibiotics don't help. It's not an infection.
Right. It's just what's happening in your digestive system there. Beth is wondering, are American medical schools, are they teaching this information, this important information?
I can't generalize it. So there's some of that teaching, for example, at UCLA. I'm sure it's at UCSD, where you have one of the most prominent, gut microbiome people there. And so I think it's definitely happening in some universities. I'm not sure if the students get the information about the diet part. That's always been something that's been totally neglected in the medical curriculum. And but that will change, because there's more and more young physicians who actually get a master's degree in nutrition, because they realize that's important, as
Right.
a treatment.
It's not just about writing a prescription. There's a whole body concept that needs to go on. I mean, we still need the prescriptions for some things, but we also need to do things a little bit more naturally. Dr. Muir, it was a wonderful having you. You did mention that if anybody wants to find out more information, you have a newsletter and a website to go to, and it's just emeranmayor.com, correct?
Yes, yes.
And again, I had the book in the comment section. You can easily click on that. So with that, we are going to say goodnight. So thank you.
It was a pleasure. I'll stop by next time I'm down in La Jolla.
And when we're actually able to have real events, we'll have you back at the store for another event with us.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.